There are few names in Hollywood that command as much respect and admiration as Denzel Washington. For over 4 decades, he has been the gold standard, a man whose performances were not just acts, but living, breathing experiences. From Glory to Training Day, from Malcolm X to Fences, Denzel became the voice of integrity, strength, and unwavering conviction. To millions, he was untouchable, the perfect balance of talent, discipline, and grace. But behind the spotlight, behind the perfectly delivered lines and glowing red carpets, lies a truth few ever see. At 70, Denzel Washington stands at a point in life where the applause has quieted, and what remains are the echoes of battles fought, both in his career and within his heart. He's faced loss, doubt, and the relentless pressure of being more than just a man, of being a symbol. And that burden, even for someone as strong as Denzel, comes with pain that words can barely describe. This is not the story of a fall from grace. It's the story of what it truly costs to remain great for so long. The sleepless nights, the heavy expectations, the grief of losing loved ones while still smiling for cameras. Today we look beyond the fame and fortune to uncover the tragedy of Denzel Washington that will break your heart. For decades, Denzel Washington's image has been one of strength, poise, and quiet confidence. He's the man who never cracks, never falters, and never lets the world see him bleed. Whether playing a flawed hero or a morally complex leader, he carried himself with an intensity that made audiences believe he was unshakable. But those closest to him know that image came with a heavy price. Denzel's story began in Mount Vernon, New York, far from the glitz of Hollywood. His mother, Lennis, was a beauty salon owner who taught him discipline and faith. His father, Denzel Sr., was a Pentecostal minister whose presence loomed large but distant. The two eventually divorced when Denzel was just a teenager, a moment that left scars he rarely speaks about. The separation shattered the foundation of his young life, planting in him a lifelong fear of emotional disconnection. "My father was a good man," Denzel once said, "but we didn't have much of a relationship." That loss of paternal connection would shape how he saw himself as a man. And later, as a father, as his acting career took off, Denzel made a promise to never let fame consume his faith or values. Yet, as offers poured in, the demands became relentless. He was constantly on film sets, chasing excellence, pushing himself to levels few could endure. Hollywood celebrated his dedication, but few knew about the exhaustion behind those accolades. He wasn't just acting. He was carrying the expectations of an entire generation of black actors who looked to him as a symbol of possibility. That weight, though invisible, was crushing. He often turned to faith to stay grounded, but even prayer couldn't erase the loneliness that success brings. Denzel once admitted that the more famous he became, the harder it was to find real connection. Every friendship seemed filtered through fame. Every compliment sounded rehearsed. And while his public persona remained strong behind closed doors, he wrestled with the emptiness that comes when your life becomes a constant performance. As the years passed, that emotional weight took its toll. The smile we saw on talk shows, it hid the fatigue of a man who had spent decades trying to live up to an impossible standard. He wasn't just an actor. He was a role model, a symbol, a leader. And there's no script for that kind of responsibility. Denzel's tragedy isn't defined by scandal or failure. It's quieter, deeper. The tragedy of a man who gave everything to his craft, and in doing so, sometimes forgot how to rest. He often said, "Ease is a greater threat to progress than hardship." But as he entered his later years, he began to wonder, what happens when hardship becomes your only constant? Now at 70, looking back on a legacy built through relentless perseverance, Denzel's eyes tell a different story. The smile is still there, but so is the weariness. His tragedy isn't the loss of success. To the world, looks glorious, the awards, the applause, the flashing lights. But for Denzel Washington, success was often a double-edged sword. While the world celebrated his triumphs, few understood the silent pressure that came with being the Denzel Washington. The man who couldn't fail. The icon who had to be perfect every single time. In Hollywood, every actor faces scrutiny. But for Denzel, the expectations were different, heavier, sharper. He wasn't just an actor. He was a cultural pillar. Every performance was viewed not only as art, but as representation. When he took on Malcolm X, he wasn't simply portraying a man. He was carrying the weight of history, responsibility, and pride. And when the Oscar went to someone else that year, it wasn't just disappointment, it was heartbreak. For Denzel, every setback felt personal. Every oversight felt like a wound carved deep into his spirit. He would eventually win 2 Academy Awards, but even those victories carried shadows. After Training Day, some critics said he only won because he played a villain, as if his decades of brilliance needed justification. Denzel smiled through it, thanked his peers, and moved on. But behind the composed exterior, there was a man growing tired of the politics of fame. He once said, "You pray for rain. You gotta deal with the mud, too." The mud, in his case, was the endless judgment that followed every step he took. Fame also demanded a personal sacrifice that no trophy could balance. His devotion to family, his wife Pauletta and their children, often collided with the demands of stardom. Long filming schedules pulled him away from home for months, sometimes years. He missed moments that can never be repeated. Birthdays, milestones, quiet family dinners. Though he tried to make up for it, the guilt lingered. "You can't serve 2 masters," he once reflected, hinting at the painful choice between career and peace. The irony of Denzel's life is that the very qualities that made him great, his discipline, intensity, and perfectionism, also isolated him. He couldn't turn it off. Even when the cameras stopped rolling, he carried that same weight into his personal life. Friends said he was a thinker, a man who rarely allowed himself to just be. His mind was always running, analyzing, planning, striving. And when the world expects you to be flawless, you start to forget what it feels like to be human. In recent years, as he's grown older, Denzel has begun to speak more openly about mortality and faith. He has lost friends, colleagues, and mentors along the way, people who once stood beside him in the bright light of success, now gone too soon. Each loss reminded him of the fragility behind the fame. He has often been quoted saying, "I've been blessed beyond measure." But blessings don't mean you don't bleed. The tragedy of Denzel Washington isn't that he fell. It's that he never allowed himself to. He's held the world on his shoulders for so long that he forgot what it feels like to put it down. And as he stands now, at 70, reflecting on the decades of triumphs and tears, he seems caught between pride and pain, proud of what he built, but aware of everything it cost. Hollywood sees his trophies. The world sees his legacy. But behind the polished smile of Denzel Washington is a lifetime of sacrifice, exhaustion, and the unspoken burden of being extraordinary in a world that never lets you rest. To the public, Denzel Washington's marriage to Pauletta Pearson Washington has always been the model of Hollywood stability. Over 40 years together in an industry where relationships crumble overnight. But even the strongest bonds are tested by time, distance, and the pressures of fame. Behind the camera flashes and red carpet smiles, Denzel and Pauletta's story has seen its share of struggle, forgiveness, and sacrifice. They met long before he became a superstar. Back then, Denzel was just another young actor with big dreams and no guarantees. Pauletta saw the man behind the ambition, the one with depth, faith, and a quiet fire. She believed in him when few did, and when success finally came, he never forgot that. "She gave up her life for mine," he once said. She was there for everything. But what he rarely admits publicly is how difficult it was to balance the man he was at home with the man the world wanted him to be. As Denzel's career exploded, the separation between his personal and professional life began to blur. Long days on set and constant travel meant months away from his wife and children. He missed milestones, school plays, and family dinners. Pauletta held the household together while Denzel carried the weight of global fame. Over time, that imbalance created strain, the kind of quiet distance that even love struggles to bridge. There were rumors, tabloid whispers, and moments when the foundation seemed to tremble. But what saved them wasn't perfection, it was faith. Their shared belief in God became the anchor when everything else threatened to drift. Still, even faith couldn't shield Denzel from the pain of loss that came as the years passed. He's spoken about losing close friends, actors, mentors, and collaborators who helped shape his journey. The passing of Chadwick Boseman, for example, hit him especially hard. Few knew that Denzel secretly paid for Boseman's tuition at Oxford when the young actor couldn't afford it. When Chadwick passed, Denzel said quietly, "He was a gentle soul. He didn't waste his time here." Those words carried the weight of a man who had seen too much death, too much loss, and too many good people leave before their time. In interviews, Denzel often deflects questions about personal pain, but his eyes tell the truth. They carry the kind of sadness that doesn't fade, the sadness of a man who has lived long enough to see both the beauty and brutality of life. Fame doesn't protect you from grief. It only makes you grieve in silence. For every role that earned him praise, there were moments off-screen when he questioned whether the cost of his success was too high. Now at 70, as Denzel looks back on the empire he's built, he also looks inward, toward the man behind the icon. He's begun to speak more about family, forgiveness, and slowing down. The fierce competitor in him has softened into a man of wisdom and reflection. Yet the tragedy remains that it took decades of sacrifice, loss, and heartbreak to find that peace. Denzel's love story with Pauletta isn't perfect, and that's exactly why it's real. It's a story of endurance, faith, and resilience in a world that doesn't always reward those things. They've survived the storms of fame, the sting of distance, and the loneliness that hides behind applause. But through it all, one truth has remained. No matter how high he climbed, Denzel Washington never stopped being human. And sometimes being human means hurting quietly. Even when the world believes you have everything, there comes a point in every great man's life when the applause fades. The cameras stop flashing, and the silence becomes louder than the noise that once surrounded him. For Denzel Washington, that moment has quietly arrived. At 70, he stands not just as one of the most respected actors of his generation, but as a man deeply aware of the cost that came with his greatness. The world still sees the legend, the awards, the speeches, the elegance. But when the lights go off and the red carpet rolls away, what remains is a man alone with his thoughts, reflecting on the decades that shaped him. In recent interviews, Denzel's tone has shifted. He speaks less about success and more about legacy, not the kind etched in gold, but the kind that lives in hearts. He says, "I'm in the service business now. I'm here to serve God, my family, and others." Those words reveal a man who has endured the storm and finally found the calm. Yet the tragedy behind that serenity is knowing how much he had to lose to reach it. The relentless pursuit of perfection left emotional bruises, relationships strained, time lost, moments that can never return. He has everything the world admires, yet sometimes it feels like he gave up pieces of himself to keep it all together. His children, John David, Katia, Olivia, and Malcolm, are now grown, each forging their own paths. Denzel beams with pride when he speaks about them. But there's a shadow in his pride, the awareness that their childhood slipped by while he was on sets halfway across the world. "I wasn't always there," he once confessed. "But I hope they know I was fighting for something that would one day be theirs, too." It's the confession of a man who loved deeply, but who often loved from a distance. Age has also brought reflection on mortality. The man who once commanded the screen with fire and conviction now speaks of humility, grace, and the inevitability of life's final act. He's buried friends, watched his heroes fade, and come to understand that even legends are not immune to time's cruelty. Yet through all of it, he's held on to faith, that unshakable belief that every hardship has meaning, and that pain in some way refines the soul. "I've learned that you can't take it with you," he says. "The only thing that lasts is what you do for others." Still, beneath his calm wisdom lies the quiet ache of a man who's seen how fleeting it all is. The fame, the applause, the admiration, they come and go. But the loneliness of being the best, the burden of always being the strong one never truly leaves. That's the heartbreak of Denzel Washington's story. Not tragedy in the tabloid sense, but tragedy in the human sense. The kind that reminds us that even the brightest stars carry shadows. And yet, perhaps the most powerful part of Denzel's journey is that he never let the darkness consume him. He turned pain into purpose, isolation into insight, and fame into faith. He once said, "You'll never see a U-Haul behind a hearse." A reminder that, in the end, all that matters is love, compassion, and the impact you leave behind. Today, as he quietly steps back from the frenzy of Hollywood, Denzel Washington's legacy feels complete, not because of the awards, but because of the resilience behind them. His tragedy is not his downfall, but the depth of his humanity. The man who once carried the world on his shoulders now carries only gratitude in his heart. And perhaps that's the most beautiful ending of all, because behind the legend, behind the fame, and behind the heartbreak, there stands a man who never stopped believing, never stopped serving, and never stopped trying to be better than he was yesterday.